Eleventy is a static site generator built using plain old JavaScript. So, what's the deal with wanting to add TypeScript and JSX, Paul?
Hey, Colin, I'm going to convince you that JSX without a single page application is a good idea.
All right, let's get into it. So, as we said in the intro, Eleventy is a static site generator typically built with plain old JavaScript. There's templating languages like Nunjux, Handlebars, even Liquid. So, why would you want to use JSX? Paul, take it away.
This is part of a long running project that you and I have had at JetBrains called the JetBrains Guide. It
Hmm.
was originally in what's the word I'm looking for, Khalid?
Pain. I mean, Gatsby
Yeah.
in Gatsby. Yes.
And as soon as you and I started talking about this, you were like 11, 11, 11. And I'm like, no, no, no.
Hmm.
And part of the deal was this is just some personal blog. This is a large knowledge base with lots of contributors in it and stuff like that. You finally convinced me. And sometime like April of last year,
Hmm.
into March, we did the commit to de-Gatsbyify the JetBrains guide. This is the commit. And what we found was we kind of missed some of the tooling that you would get from some of these other technologies. You're sitting in a handlebars file and you want to navigate to a symbol. Well, if nothing is a symbol, you're not going to have much navigation.
Hmm.
And so we wanted JSX. We just didn't want the other thing.
Yeah.
We wanted TypeScript. We wanted some of the tooling that you would get for a large project, lots of contributors, mission critical, knowledge base, all that kind of stuff. And so we worked and worked on it throughout the rest of the year. And then we wound up doing another iteration that gave us all of that tooling. And then we've refactored it into another iteration so that we could come here and talk to all of you about it with the arrival of this. So, Khalid, do you want to explain a little bit about what's going on with 11.3 and ESM?
Yeah. With Eleventy, well, for the folks in the JavaScript ecosystem, there's multiple ways to kind of take advantage of dependencies, but it's kind of a mishmash of styles. So you have like common JS, but the new style is modules, right? So using that import keyword, Eleventy had like a mix of common JS previously in older versions. And the third version, this upcoming one that's still in beta as we record this,
Mhm.
is moving to this ESM model. So with ESM, we get to take advantage of all the nice things, and importing dependencies using that nice style. We no longer need that require keyword. Is that a good explanation of why we want to move to ESM, Paul?
Indeed. And there was some stuff that really drove us because we got some code that's client side rendered as well as server side rendered. And in the old world of common JS, we were kind of in a weird in between, about TypeScript versus JavaScript in the browser. And so we want to step back and do all this. But man, when you and I did it, it was like this works together with this. But when you put that in,
Yeah. Yeah.
well, okay, I'll replace that with it. Oh no, then that made this one not work. And so we had to get this combination, and we found that the TSX project, which is a layer on top of ES Build, right?
That's correct. Yep.
And it's got all the wires wiggled the correct way that we could never quite figure out. And then a JSX server-side JSX package called JSX Automatic Runtime had these 4 or 5 things in it that we were really struggling with. And so we did this, and I did a little bit of a spike in
Mhm.
a README that explains the why on all of this and then shows step by little teeny tiny step as we added all the pieces together. And so that's what we would like to show here, that you can get a simplified high performance website development experience and the tooling of TypeScript and TSX. One of the things that we got or in the process of getting rid of is Vite. There was a Vite plugin for Eleventy that let us do TypeScript, gave us some things we didn't want. And so this, Khalid, you describe this stack as a little bit more stripped down.
Yeah, it's more stripped down, but most importantly, I think using TSX and using this JSX async runtime for folks who are using Eleventy, for folks who are doing JavaScript, they'll probably know asynchronous programming is really important for kind of
Mhm.
building this stuff. So we wanted to use JSX, but still take advantage of Eleventy's asynchronous like aspects, especially when it came to rendering components, taking advantage of plugins like image optimization that operate on
Yes.
async and await. So this is kind of the crux of why we wanted or why we kind of set up the project this way, to really still utilize that asynchronous style, which Paul, Liquid does support async out of the box, but again, we wanted JSX, or you
We
wanted
wanted
JSX.
tooling, and coming
Yes.
back to that point of this, you can do JSX without React, Preact, or any kind of SPA. And that's what we
Hmm.
wanted. We wanted regular old builds, server side rendered. We're putting the web back in the web.
Hmm.
How about I give a little bit of a demo of this?
Yeah, go for it. I think people are probably itching to see how this all comes together and maybe how they can do it themselves.
All right, cool. Okay, here I have a clone of the repo that I was just showing in the browser. It's really, really simplified and stripped down so we can focus just on these concepts. But even in this teeny tiny step, this is a reflection of a lot of pain that Khalid and I went through trying to get all these set up. So the
Hmm.
first thing we'll start with is the package.json. And before we would run under Vite, right?
Yep, yep.
And
So
so
V
instead, we're going
images.
to run under this command, this Node.js command from a package called TSX, which does the ES build wiring for us. It does. It doesn't use ES build register, right?
I'm not sure.
I don't
I
think it
think.
does. That was one of the things we needed to get rid of because there was a pull request for something in there about H support that never ever got merged. Uh,
Mhm.
so what we have here is a package.json with some start scripts in it for Eleventy. If you're familiar with Eleventy, this doesn't look right. It's because we can't use the npx run. We have to point at something. We're going to point at a configuration, but what's up with that? We have
That's
a
cool.
TypeScript configuration file. We didn't have that before, did we?
Mhm.
So that was a pretty nice thing to have. Then our build, and we'll talk about test a little bit later. As far as dependencies, obviously Eleventy in alpha,
Mhm.
and this render in Node.js JSX runtime that's not part of Babel, not part of Webpack, not part of a big tooling chain. It's a small standalone thing. Really neat package. You agree?
Mhm. Yeah, it was a godsend when we found it because it was like the thing we've been looking for. It's kind of like Indiana Jones finding that holy grail, you know, like.
Yeah. And in fact, for the Holy Grail, the thing that was really killing you with our previous thing, VHTML, was the lack of async support, right?
Yep. Again, Eleventy's core like pipeline is very async friendly, and it was really like butting heads with like wanting us wanting to use JSX, but also wanting to take advantage of the great plugin ecosystem that is
Correct.
available in Eleventy. So, yeah.
So let's go over to the Eleventy config file. You'll see that we're in ESM now. We're actually in TypeScript. Actually,
Hmm.
Eleventy doesn't have any TypeScript.
Yeah.
And this is a magic part of the equation. If we went back to this write up, there's a good write up about what's going on with this wiring up. We're essentially
Mhm.
taking over the JavaScript template support. Is that what Eleventy calls it?
Mhm. Correct.
And saying when you see files that with these extensions, treat them like JavaScript templates. Then the magic. We're going to add a transform that says you and I are baffled by what this value actually means. We
I
think it means files
Yeah.
ending in TSX. I don't know.
I think it's a I will conjecture, but if folks know, please leave it in the
Yeah.
comments. Tell us we're wrong. We'll welcome the negative engagement. It's fine. But I think it's the name. So when you're looking at the build output, you can kind of identify when something is
Right.
occurring. And if something goes wrong, you can identify where that thing went wrong. So I think it's a name.
In Eleventy, these transforms are given a string and they return a string and they can do whatever they want. They're also the string, as you can see, any. We've had mixed emotions about what Eleventy is passing us and what the this is. So
Mhm.
that story remains to be told. And then the one Khalid was really happy about this. We can await these things and use the JSX automatic runtime to render the string of JSX
Mhm.
into a string of string, and then we jam a doc type on it. Everything else is just normal 11 stuff. Then on to Colin, any more that you want to add to this?
Well, again, this is probably going to be part of your demo here a little soon, but just to kind of get ahead a little, like remember, JSX is about components, component driven development. So those components typically are like string, like render out to strings, but you can also have JavaScript or TypeScript that may execute an asynchronous function like disk IO. Maybe you go fetch a URL, bring that
Mhm.
data back. So that's why it's important to have async await here. So, well, you'll show us, right, Paul?
Sure. Mhm.
Yep.
Okay, and on to the part that was magical mysticism.
Hmm.
I don't know what this does, and so I'll just be copying it to every file I ever have in the future. There are either 3 or 4 values here that
Hmm.
all imply different instructions to ESBuild about the intermediate representation of the parsing of the JSX and how downstream things will handle it. And then this was kind of the important one because we didn't want to have to import H everywhere. That was an annoyance previously.
Hmm.
By telling the world, in this case ESBuild, that this is the package that has the magic function that will hand you the H function.
Hmm.
We don't have to specify it everywhere. Okay,
Yeah, and
go
well,
ahead.
I just want to clarify too. It's if you're using TypeScript JSX, like that JSX style, which again you'll be demoing,
Yep.
Paul, has kind of been baked into TypeScript. So the JSX is really like syntactical sugar in TypeScript, and you can kind of plug in your own processor for that JSX, and
Well
that's
said.
essentially what you've done here, Paul.
Well
Right?
said.
Yep.
Yeah,
So.
over the like generations of this, they've really developed a tooling ecosystem. So this is almost like an intermediate language kind of thing. Let's
Mhm.
run it. So let's run Eleventy, and it wrote a site, and I can look at it. My CSS skills. All right, so it's running. That all works. What is it that actually ran? So I'm going to go to the root of the site, the one document.
Mhm.
And if you use Eleventy, you'll know that that's pretty familiar. You point at a layout, but I could go find that. But I'm now in tooling land and I have symbols
Mhm. Very cool.
and I can navigate by symbol, which is in very large projects, very, very handy. You get the IDE that gives you support for all this stuff. And we'll
Yeah.
talk about a whole long list of things that symbols give you. One little thing that I like doing, just taste, is Eleventy wants something exported called render, but I don't want every one of my symbols to be render. So I actually name it the right thing so I could jump to it and then do this thing down here. You got any opinion on that, Colin?
I mean, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So
Great Moments in Philosophy by Khalid Abuhakmeh.
yeah,
Now I'm in this main layout, and now I can go do all of those things that you associate with spas and component-driven development, just like Khalid said. I've got this thing called heading. I could delete that, and I'll get squiggled. I can walk up to it, and I can import it. Or I can autocomplete, and it goes and knows all the components in my project. So it autocompletes and imports.
very
It
cool.
knows the props. It knows that that needs to be a string. And we'll see in a second about how it knew that that should be a string. So we're already in a place where the tooling is helping, but it's not taking over my web platform oriented project. Anything you want to add to that before we look at this component?
No, I mean, this is, for folks, I have a dirty little secret. I'm actually a .NET developer. So,
I'm working on Python.
but, I love tooling. .NET's greatest strengths are
Mhm.
tooling with great tools in that ecosystem. So, I'm an IDE person. I like this stuff, and it just makes life so much easier on big projects like Paul has been saying.
Yeah, yeah.
So, super awesome. Yeah.
This is some TypeScript. We've been talking about TSX, but we should talk about TypeScript too. Eleventy has a little protocol for how it calls layouts and templates, but it doesn't provide any typing about that. There's, what is it called? The page and data or something like that?
Mhm. Well, those are typically there, especially for render, but we've also found there are certain scenarios where the arguments change.
Yeah.
So it's like hit or miss. But for the most part, yeah, you're right. We want to type this stuff so that new individuals coming into the project, don't make mistakes. They can quickly understand the code base. So yeah, it's super
Yep.
awesome.
And like Colin was just saying, we did this on our own project and we wind up doing our own typing for the information we're expecting to be coming. So I
Mhm.
just kind of invented a concept called view that doesn't exist in Eleventy, but it's helpful for us as the contract between the system and us. And
Mhm.
then we use destructuring to get that. Now that I'm in the world of component driven development, I've got a component. And this is, gotta say, a hell of a lot cooler than macros or short codes or anything like that, because we've got all this structure, all this indexing, all this deep tooling, and I can just command click on it and jump to it. And I'm now in that component. So I jumped to the navigation of it. And just like you would expect in component driven development, props, even though there's no React involved, there's JSX involved. There's
Mhm.
TSX involved. So there's prompts, and I put down the contract for what, so an optional name with a string. I can do all of the, and then we specify what that is. We destructure it, we render it, and we say that we're returning not a string, but a JSX element, because that's actually what it is. It isn't until here that it turns into a string. All the intermediate tooling, it's a JSX element. What else can I do? I can refactor rename. And so now if I go back to my layout, I'll see that it did it. And then everything got, I could say undo. That was a bad idea. And everything goes back where it was. So refactoring works. Extracting interfaces and types from signatures work. I can, for example, this is something that in our fairly massive project we use a lot. We meaning me. And I don't mean testing. I'm gonna sneak up on you on that in a second. If I change this to number, it starts telling me everywhere in my project, whether I've opened the file or not, that now disobeys that contract.
Mm-hmm.
When you are refactoring and making changes, this is a godsend. You probably wouldn't get that with Liquid or Nunjucks or Handlebars or stuff like that. All right. And then can do navigate to usages to get to the tests. So we'll switch over into our favorite thing, testing. When you get to the test for this, I can jump to it pretty quickly by going to here. And so I'm now in the test. In fact, I will I will over here, I will open the implementation. So I'm now in testing. What I will do is I will fire up the vtest test runner, and it is going to run really quick, and it's going to go into watch mode, and it only reruns what's necessary for a single test. So for example, if I change just that, it will run one test very fast. I can even close this, and the IDE WebStorm gives me a pop-up right in my editor, right where the problem is. And I can fix it, and it goes away because the test passed fine. These tests run so fast, I just leave them running all the time. In fact, I usually leave them running in debug mode. So for example, I can put a breakpoint here, and now I can say, and when I save, I will get to that breakpoint, and I will be able to see what is my problem. I passed in name as TSX, and I'm returning, oh, it's hello, not X hello. Duh, how dumb am I? Clear my breakpoint. I could also do that same by walking up to an individual test. I'll turn off my watch mode, and I'll walk up to an individual test and run it under the debugger. It's not in watch mode, so I would do that. Control D, rerun it, it passes. So that's a little bit about the tooling. Before we head over and close out by looking at this in our actual site with a whole bunch of stuff, Khalid, anything jump out to you on this?
Well, like component driven development is really about encapsulating functionality and reusing functionality and kind of just looking at your tests. It's really neat that you can kind of test in isolation and really get your components to a place where you can feel confident about putting them in, say, like the context of an entire website.
Right.
You had mentioned like Liquid or Nunjucks or these other templating languages, and they were really created at a time where everything was like text based. Liquid kind of comes from the Ruby community. The Ruby community's kind of been low tooling, maybe not really that interested in tooling. So like when you run into errors, you typically run into those errors at runtime. So it's nice to have tooling involved. It's nice to write those tests in advance. It's nice to be able to step in and debug them. And it kind of gives you that confidence that whatever site you're building is going to end up in a really, really good spot as you kind of work through this. So very cool stuff. Very cool stuff, Paul.
Well said on all that. You and I try to work in small units, so you just get that joy of feeling under control. And it's not like I got to do the universe in order to poke at this one little tiny thing.
Mhm.
You can still do that. I can still put a breakpoint here and go to the Eleventy build, run it under the debugger, and it will build my site, but it'll stop right there. So if
Mhm.
you want the integration end to end, whatever you want to call it, if you don't believe in writing tests, you still get a lot of value from tooling. This is a godsend for you and me, right?
Mhm. Yeah, especially, we are using beta software when it comes to Eleventy 3.0. So, arguments are changing, internal implementations are changing. So, something isn't feeling quite right, using that debugger to kind of actually see what reality is versus what our assumptions are. Yeah, clears things up really, really quick. So, very awesome stuff.
Last thing on the implementation before we go to closeout time. In for testing under vtest, there's a config file cleverly named vtest config.js. And this was something I had to get help from Joaquin Sanchez. He actually saved me from giving up. The moment I tried to give up and tell you that it wouldn't work, he told me in Discord, well, do this. So I could pass arguments to ESBuild that says when you're running under Vite, blah, 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 blah. And the other thing is we have a fake browser that we're using for all our assertions, and I'm using Happy DOM for that. All right, Khalid, that's my walkthrough, man.
Dude, there's a lot of cool stuff there, you know, like one thing, yes, the Eleventy community and the JavaScript community are awesome. Like it's always nice to be able to experiment, try things, but also when you get stuck to kind of reach out to people and get that help. So again, big shout out to everyone who's kind of like doing the open source work, answering questions, and yeah, just being a good community member. That's super awesome. But
well, let's give credit where credit's due. Zach is a really good person, and as the head of Eleventy, he's championing a lot of things bigger than Eleventy, right?
Yep. So yeah, it's super exciting to kind of at least be working with this stuff and trying it out. And you know, just being able to experiment, like this is almost like a mad scientist idea, but the fact that it's gotten to this point where it works and powers our site, it's pretty neat. And we're definitely seeing some of the gains. And I think what we're doing today is wanting to kind of share that with the folks out there and see if anybody's interested in it. So yeah, pretty cool. So that's it for the episode of Strongly Hyped. Thanks for joining us. If you like this episode, now's a good time to like and subscribe. Again, thank you, Paul, for sharing that amazing stuff. We'll be adding links to that demo site. So if you want to try this out for yourself, check out the description. And yeah, let us know in the comments if there's any topics, ideas, or questions you have. We'll be happy to answer them for you. So on that note, again, thank you, Paul, and we'll see you folks next time.
See you next time.